Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Adam from the N+1 podcast and Miller's Custom Guitars. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am so pleased today to be joined by my guest, but we're going to hold on to him for just a minute because I have a little bit of housekeeping to do. The podcast, N+1 podcast, is all about interests, hobbies. I like to call it hobbies, passions, obsessions, but it's really whatever people are interested in. Just recently, we had Hidil in to talk about woodworking, and that was such a great episode. We've had actors on, we've had artists and musicians. Sometimes it's a little bit different like that. In a not that long ago episode, we had a special guest who talked about her passion about the topic of home birth. That guest is very special to me because it was my sister, and her husband was on recently before that also, which was Tim, who is a health expert. And so Tim Munkle and my sister Allison Munkle, they recently gave birth. In fact, it was this week. So update to the recent episode, they had a successful home birth with no complications, and little Matilda Jane was born. As I record this, it was Monday morning, my time, afternoon their time. They're on the East Coast. So congratulations, Allison and Tim. So that was great. And we're already in love. So they have 3 little girls now. Mazel tov, L'chaim, whatever, however you say it. Congratulations. We're very excited. But yeah, so this show is all about whatever you're into. And we just want to bring interesting guests on and pick their brain and talk about what you're into and how you got into it and what it means to you. And we just want to talk to amazing guests. And we have a really amazing guest today. And this guest is someone I've wanted to talk to for so long. In fact, when I first launched this podcast, I had like a list, and it was like phases of guests. And it was like the first phase, like these are my, like the people like that I know, like for sure, they just like buddies, and they'll definitely come on the show because, they're just friends. And, and then there's like, this is like phase 2. Like these are people that I've met and I could probably reach out to them and they'll probably say yes, but I really, really want to talk to them. So I'm going to hound them until they'll say yes. And this is definitely one of those people. And I would like to introduce you to Blake Wrinn. Blake, welcome.
Hey, Adam. So good to be here.
Yes. And I'm going to give you kind of a short introduction because I don't want to botch it. I don't want to get it wrong because I'm going to give you what I think I know about what you do.
Sure.
And then I'm going to let you tell me about what you do. Because from what I understand, you are basically a Nashville session musician. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, cool.
Correct. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do? We're not going to dive deep right now because we're going to save that a little bit for later, but just kind of an overview of like the kind of things you do. And tell me about it.
Sure. Yeah. So much like we learned in music school as kids, these composers would hire musicians, right, to play out the score that they have written. It's very similar in this day and age, with rock and roll and pop music and those kind of things. We kind of do the same thing still. And that's basically it. So producers who are in charge of building a record for a client, whether it's a signed artist or an independent artist, they will generally be the ones to hire us to play on these records just based on specific needs for that record.
That is so cool. So, as listeners will know, I am a musician. So for me, talking to you, you're like a person that is like living the dream, like you're being paid to be a musician, and as a studio musician, it's like at the highest level, like you're a dude that is in the studio, that you're working with, professional musicians, being a professional musician, and you're giving them exactly what they're asking for. That's just so stinking cool. I am just so excited to talk to you. And the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I've been in the studio like 2 times. And there were one time I recorded a song for my wife with my friend Matt. And another time I was in a band with some buddies and we had a weekend and we went in and recorded some songs. I don't know if we ever actually put them together. But I've never been in the studio for someone else. We never went and really went back and worked those songs, worked the parts. We never went in. It was basically everybody in at the same time. Go. It was basically like a recorded practice. We never went and did overdubs. We never did punch-ins. We never did any of that stuff. And so I never really have done the studio experience. And I wanted to talk to someone who has, because like I said, for me as a musician, like, I think it's so stinking cool, man.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I wanted to get into it, and I wanted to start with the topic. And, I'm a musician, but not everyone is. Not all of our listeners are, or potential new listeners. So I always like to say, and it's a little reductive, but explain it like I'm 5, right? If you're talking to someone who's maybe not a musician, or, like you meet someone on the street, oh, what do you do? And then someone say, oh, I'm a studio musician. Well, what's that? How do you explain, or how do you explain it to your kids? Like, what do you do, Dad? You can explain it to us. What is a studio musician? And then in a minute, we'll talk about how you got into it.
Sure. Yeah. That's a great question. So a studio musician, I would say, at heart, it's the mindset of being a server. Just like we're in the service industry,
Mm-hmm.
So it's not. Yeah, it's not always about. You have different sides to music. You have like starting a band with your friends, right? And sometimes even people taking that on the road, and you're all kind of doing that music journey together. A lot of times there are just some things with those kinds of bands that may be out of the specific player's toolkit, and a producer may call us in just to kind of help fill some ideas out there in the studio. Other ones are just for an artist that may just be a singer, right? And so they don't have a band. They may have a live band, but as you know, I'm sure the live playing aspect is quite different than the studio playing. Everything from when you're playing live, you're playing kind of all the guitar parts you can, right?
Yeah.
And covering as much as you can. Where we're thinking a little more under the microscope, like, and obviously a stereo field too. If you're not familiar with that, we just have 2 ears, right? And so we hear in dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're thinking in that way. We're kind of mini producers. We're thinking as we play, like, this part would be good, but it needs to sit over here in the mix, and this thing will be good over here. And we're trying to pick the listener's ear at the end of the day. So it's a combination of that mixed with the service industry. We are not there to just play our favorite kind of music. We are there to play what's on the docket for that day and do it to the best of our ability. And at the end of the day, too, in the studio, everything comes down to sound quality, that performance and the feeling you get out of it. You can't see what pair of shoes the guy's wearing and those kinds of things. It's all about a lot of fine-tuned instruments and perceptions, and it's just a different aspect of the studio. But that's basically what we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had my dad on, who's also a musician, worship leader, musician, and we had a whole episode where we just talked about his lifelong pursuit of doing less in music. And it's he said, like, for him, everything should be in service to the song, and like, hey, if you're playing this, do you need to play so much? Can you scale back what you're playing? And he says, like, as he teaches bands and as he coaches worship teams, like, if he can get everyone in the band to see the whole picture, and look at what everyone's trying to do. But, as musicians, we get so focused on our part and, like, oh, these are the chords. This is our part. We say, hey, this is the whole picture. And if we all listen to everything, it's like, well, hey, this, I'm way too busy here because there's all so much sound. And that's basically what you're doing, but you're doing that on a micro scale. Like, like I need the left ear to hear just this little tiny thing. And maybe the right ear does this other thing. And, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. That kind of thing. Sure.
Awesome. And then I've heard other like studio musicians say things like, does this artist want me, or do they just want a part? Have you heard things like that? Like, are they like hiring Blake Wrinn because they want Blake Wrinn, or are they hiring Blake Wrinn because they just need a musician? Is that like, are they like, have you felt like that before?
I've honestly never thought of that. I guess I was conditioned from kind of an early age of just the mindset of, like you said, I'm there to serve the
Hmm.
song.
Okay.
That was kind of beat into me, for
Hmm.
multiple decades now, and I can't say I've honestly ever thought of it that way.
Yeah. I think that might be some, like, you think of like Josh Smith, or, musicians that have like a really specific, strong
Man,
style. Like
yeah,
sometimes he might get hired to do studio work. And, so he comes in and says, well, do they want Josh Smith, or do they just need someone to do a part, so.
sure. That is a valid question in that aspect. Like, are
Yeah.
they wanting a thing? Like, that's a good question. Are you wanting me to do something that you kind of know is my wheelhouse, or are we here today just because, like,
Yeah.
I mean, either way, it's an honor, right?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, maybe a good way to pinpoint what they're after.
Right. So how did you end up in the studio, man? I mean, like a lot of us I'd love to be doing studio stuff, but I'm selling plumbing stuff, man. Like, how did you end up in the studio?
Well, but I mean, we all have worn our multiple hats, and we all have grinded through dry spells, if you will. But
Sure.
um, I guess I guess it started with a little bit of passion and ambition in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was in drumline, and I remember this really great guy who wasn't our main instructor, but he was one of kind of the co-instructors. But he was there not too often. So when we would see him, it was a real treat. And he was just a monster drummer. And I remember hearing, this was like my freshman year of high school. I remember hearing that Kyle was a session player in Nashville. And that just like, I had remembered my dad talking about those guys because my dad was a veteran road musician. But I remember that was kind of the moment. It was like, that's what I wanted. And that turned into what I felt called to do, like what I felt the Lord was calling me to do. And I think at that point, it was just a fire lit under my tail.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of a school that doesn't exist, in a way. So I think that I was really blessed to have a good like community, especially my dad's friends, kind of just really eating our lunch, putting us
Mm-hmm.
on stage with them, but eating our lunch and being
Mm-hmm.
very honest and whipping us into shape, that boot camp method almost.
Yeah.
And I'd say that was a huge contributor to it. I got to a point to where the producer, like maybe a demo producers and things like that I was working for, some of them were really kind to me and just always having me along for stuff and always calling me for work. And when I probably didn't deserve it, honestly, looking back at some of those recordings. But I think I got to a point where one of them, who's a really good friend of mine, his name is Jacob Rice, and this was maybe 13 years ago now or so. He was like, he's like, Blake, I don't think that there's really anywhere else for you to go unless you like can lean into a mentor. Like you get a mentor, like find somebody that's playing on these records you love and your kind of target goals when you listen to them and find out who those guys are. So I did just that.
Really?
Yeah, I did
That's
just
awesome.
that and reached out to a couple of them, and two of those guys are extremely close. Not just mentors, but friends, and I feel like they have my back. And just through that, it's not a short story to tell because it all really kind of comes down through networking. And
Of course, sure.
the thing about networking, anybody who's doing it for a living, they'll tell you like it was always because of somebody they had met way before, while you got the call of what you're in. It's just kind of that thing, man. Like, and I found it just came down to just treating people with respect and treating them wonderfully, and it's just like, there's so many great players in Nashville, man, and so many I look at, and it's just like makes you want to hang up the hat for a day, But I think part of it too is once we get in that room, especially in the studio, it can get pretty stressful sometimes. I think that just being a cool hang and kind of diffusing the bomb, if you will, kind of helps. So I don't know. I think that's a little bit how I slipped in.
Mm-hmm. So you said you had you developed maybe not one but two mentors, which is that's even better, right?
Right, yeah.
And you said it's kind of like too long of a story to share the whole thing, but I was wondering, maybe could you give maybe an example of maybe like a short story of how that mentor relationship might have worked, maybe in one specific scenario, like maybe early on or towards the beginning, like maybe if you got into a jam, or I don't know, just something of maybe just give an example of how that might have worked.
For sure, man. Yeah, I'll. Two of them are really cool. So my closest one is Jerry McPherson, and Jerry is now. I mean, not just a mentor. Jerry is such a close friend. I can't imagine being without him now. But Jerry was kind of the first one that I started looking on all these records and was like, "Yep, Jerry Mack, there he is." And I didn't know anybody. Like, I didn't have anybody that was in his circle. So I just called AFM, which is a musicians union that we all work through. And I just called. I mean, I wasn't really pretending, but I just called like somebody normally would to hire Jerry. I was like, "Hey, can I get Jerry McPherson's number?" I got it. And then I reached out to him. And I left him a voice message. And I didn't hear from him for like a month. And I ended up getting the guts, like, to call him back. So I called Jerry back, and I get his voicemail again. And his voicemail was so funny. He was like, "Hey, it's Jerry. Sorry I missed your call. Just leave a voicemail, and I'll call you back, I swear." You know, and it just made me laugh. And so I left him another voice message. He called me back again that day. And he was like, "Blake, hey, man." Yeah, Jerry's all wacky and fun. He's like, "Hey, Blake, what's up, man?" He's like, "Sorry, I got your last voicemail a long time ago, but it was so garbled, I couldn't really understand what you were saying." And so he's like, "I'm glad you called back." And I basically just started giving Jerry this like mirror rehearsed, thing I had of what I was going to say to him.
You've had 2 months to stew on it, right?
You're right, yeah. And I mean, I'm at this point in time, I'm talking to a guy that's played like on every like 90% of the records I owned as a kid growing up, and so it's just kind of this like, oh my gosh. So I'm just talking to Jerry, and I'm giving my spiel, and I'm just like, I would love to meet up. And just, I'm interested in getting into sessions and stuff. The cool thing is, I don't know if this worked in my favor or not. Now, especially since social media has blossomed so much, it's like being a session player is the hot thing. And I don't know if it was necessarily a hot thing then or not, but I'm sure he had to have a lot of guys making those kinds of calls to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he took me to, we went to coffee there on Edge Hill down near Ocean Way, and we walked in, and I just started giving my spiel that I had rehearsed on the way there again, and I basically told him, I'm like, I'm a married man. I'm take this very seriously. Like, I want to provide for my family. I've had this ambition for a long time. I've worked very hard so far, and I just don't feel like I was 24 or something then. And I was like, I don't want you to feel like I'm a normal 24-year-old. I want to take this super serious. And we ended up talking for like 2 hours at that coffee shop. And then he invited me over to his house, and we just started looking through his studio, and we hung out like another 3 hours.
Yeah.
And at that point, just expediting the story, Jerry just started inviting me out to some sessions, putting me around people. And, that led to gigs and led to sessions. And I mean, that was kind of one of the really big turning points for me.
During those beginning times, what was more helpful? Like when you were behind the strings or behind the knobs? Like when you were sitting in the room playing guitar and stuff, or when you were sitting back there helping with the studio stuff?
That's a great question. So the cool thing about this first session, it was over at Ocean Way B, and I walked in, and well, first of all, again, Jerry's like a stand-up comedian. So I walk in, and all these A-list players are in there, Jeff King, Mark Hill, Steve Brewster was on drums, and I'm just walking in like,
like some of the best players in the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, no doubt. Yeah. And so Jerry gets on the talkback mic, and he's like being goofy. It's what the singer sings into scratch vocal while they're in their tracking. And he's like, "So everybody, thanks for coming out today. It's a really good turnout." And he's like, "Before we all start, Blake has something he wants to tell you." Hands the mic over to me, and I'm just like, And I just kind of ooze into the back of the room, quietly. Everybody's laughing, But that's beside the point. The cool thing is Jerry had already asked the producer to set me up a chair right next to him in the live room. And I had my own monitor mix and a set of cans, which this is the first time Jerry and I had ever hung out in the studio. And it was so unbelievably kind of it. So I got to sit out there the whole day. I remember this too. Jerry and I joke about this now because I had a terrible tooth infection in my wisdom tooth. And I was sitting there in the most pain I've ever been in my life, but I did not want to leave that session. Like I was not going to leave that session.
For sure.
I stayed there for 9 hours that day.
Of course.
Yeah. And, but that was what was cool. So I would say it was a mixture because I got to kind of float in between the control room and actually be there like staring at his hands. Like who does that?
So you get to see the choices he's making, right?
And pedals. I'm looking at his pedals,
right, and his gear, and how he's setting the knobs, and how he's setting the amps, and the choices he's making on the strings, and hearing the live mix and all this stuff. But you could also go back and see what the decisions that the studio. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so cool. And then you get to go in like the player did. Like I was in the player's shoes, and I go in and then I listen to what it sounds like on playback. And those two things together, when I wasn't getting a lot of those reps as a player, I mean, that was invaluable. It was so crazy to have that.
On that day, it sounds like that's burned into your mind pretty good. That day, how many times were you like, I don't know if I would have made that decision? And then like 20 minutes later, you're like, oh, I get it. That's why he made that decision. And he's 100% right. Like how many times it was like that? There
were a couple where it was like, it kind of goes back to the thing we touched on earlier of like specific parts. Like he would play something and I had just started demo sessions like 3 years before. So I had all this live experience under my belt. So I was just like, why isn't he filling this song out? Like I had that kind of thing a little bit. Because I was doing songs in like 4 tracks. I was giving them 4 tracks instead of like 12 or 15 like we do now I do now from my home studio. So I was just watching him do these really like intentional parts. And it was like,
what is going on? You just played 2 notes over 16 bars, like exactly. What's going on?
And you're like, surely there's going to be more. And there was more, and I just had to, because the guitar player too, bless their hearts. We just, the bass player gets his couple takes, the drummer gets their couple takes, they go out and have coffee and we're in there for 12 more, overdubs and, but it was that kind of thing.
That's so cool, man.
Yeah, it was
man,
really
what
cool.
an experience, dude. Yeah.
It was a good experience. Yeah.
Getting into like the actual questions, I could just hear you talk all day about these stories. So if we throw these questions out, it's fine.
I got a million of them. Yeah.
But I feel like you've touched on it a little bit already. But what are some misconceptions that you've come across about studio recording?
Man, fundamentals, boring fundamentals, how important they are. Freaking tuning, like tuning. Not to even mention that we play as guitar players, we play like the worst in tune instrument ever.
It's so
designed.
bad.
It's terrible.
Okay, Blake, I'm a guitar tech. Okay, that's like
so you definitely.
Okay, so like in our town, I'm a guitar tech. Yeah. So my, it's on the side, like I sell plumbing. That's my main job. On the side, I service guitars. And so like, it brings me so much joy and satisfaction to take a guitar and bring it back to someone and say, this thing is now rock solid. It's intonated, but by its very nature, the guitar it's all compromise. The whole thing is compromised. It can never play in tune. It cannot play in tune. It cannot. So the only way it can play in tune is if the player makes it play in tune.
Man, you're so playing. Right. Yeah. So there's that weird like mental muscle memory of like your finger. Our fingers just kind of go now, right. But it's like you're so right. I catch myself having to bend it slightly in tune and stuff.
Yeah. And so, I mean, one of my favorite clips is like, I think it's like Steve Ray Vaughan, one of the Austin City Limits or something. And he's wailing on this guitar. And every note is in perfect pitch. And then at the end, he plays the E chord and it's like the most out of tune chord you've ever heard. And
Yeah.
the whole song was in tune. Why? Because he's playing the guitar into tune. So yeah, that's a good one. Tuning.
That's a big one. Tuning. Yeah. And just little movements like it's a big deal. Just these normal movements you get by with string squeaks. Like it's just the discipline of no string squeaks, quick movements, trying to get everything super clean to the tape, you know. That can be challenging.
Any other fundamentals that you jump to mind besides string squeaks and tuning?
I think, you know,
those are good ones.
Keeping your guitar in maintenance is a pain. I mean, it just has
Mills
to happen.
Custom Guitar, Sonora, California.
Boom, 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 boom. Yes, sir. God bless people like you, man. My gosh. But it's just a constant. It's a constant fight, you know. You can see my little humidifier back there. I mean, we try to keep this room as controlled as we can. But
that was one thing when my dad moved from California, which is like basically beautiful all year round, you know, like maybe adjust the truss rod, you know, like maybe adjust the truss rod every year or twice a year. And he moved to Nevada and in Dayton Valley, Nevada. And then he lived there for 6 months. You know, the bridge on his guitar started splitting and like, he's like, gosh, what's happening? I'm like, Dad, you live in a desert now, like a proper desert, man. Like, so then he started like buying humidifiers and like humidifying his house and like keeping 3 humidifiers in the acoustic guitar case.
Oh, and he has to like, gosh, I can only imagine.
He has to like add water to those humidifiers like every 3 weeks. It's so dry there. Like it's so dry.
Man, we have monitored my little overdub cockpit here. In the bad, dry winters here in Tennessee, we've put about 3 gallons probably a week into the air.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, like it's been bonkers.
Take care of your guitars, people.
Yes.
As a guitar tech, I speak on behalf of the guitars. I'm like the Lorax of guitars.
Man,
you know,
speak more, yes.
That's awesome. So I used to ask this question and I kind of scrapped it, but I feel like you might have some good ones. Do you have any like horror stories of like bad, like maybe like a bad gig? I used to call it a bad gig. Maybe people were, you know, about strangling each other in the studio, about to kill each other, anything like that. You don't have to name names or anything.
Yeah, I won't name names.
Wouldn't expect you
to. I do have some doozies. Yeah. I mean, I've had some where I was always told, you know, a man is his word. You know, that's the way I was taught. And of course, you try to live up to that. And so I had some with an artist that they didn't take care of people the best on the road, but it was this specific case where they were being pursued hard by a label. And so they wanted to do this label showcase, but way out west, not here in this part for some reason. And so I had told them I would do a specific amount of gigs with them, and we kind of threw one into that mix, but we ended up making our way out west for this. The problem is I take, especially at this time because I was on the road so much, I take what I like promise my kids as seriously as I can possibly live up to. Mm-hmm. And I had, bless her heart, my daughter, I had told her that I was going to be home to see this movie that had just come out. She wanted to see forever. It's all she talked about. And we had our tickets, everything. And then I got this call from this artist. And I was like, man, I'll do it for you. But I was already kind of thinking about leaving just because of a lot of stuff that had happened. I had asked him if his management could fly me back because they were all flying out. Mm-hmm. I asked them if they could fly me back quickly so I could come back and be with my daughter. And he wouldn't even ask or anything like that. And so I tried a bunch of different scenarios of us getting back, and it actually ended up where the only way he would do it is if I paid the whole band myself out of my paycheck. And I also paid him, and he cashed the check.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. So needless to say, that was around the last I had done with him. But
wow.
Some things like that. You know, just always take care of your people, folks.
Well, and
they're
that's
there for you.
I mean, that blows me away. It shows me so much how much integrity you have to the promises you made to your daughter. I mean,
I try. I don't always live up to it, but I should try.
But that's how much your word means. That you like like this means so much to me. like it has a dollar amount, and here it is. I paid this whole thing, and
Sure. And part of it was I couldn't bear the pain of telling her no, you know. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, her dad had already been gone so long, you know, and now I'm here, and you know, it's just a big thing. So
Right.
anyway, but thank you for
that's
that.
amazing. Wow. Blake Wrinn, good father.
Thus far.
Good father, comma, passable musician.
Yeah, passable musician. That's a good shirt. That's a good T-shirt.
Oh, that's amazing.
I like
All
that.
right. So what about this whole thing that you do fills your bucket? Why do you do it?
The cool thing about making a song in general is you hit these strides. Anybody that's written a song and saw it through a whole recording process knows what I'm talking about. You'll write the song, and then it kind of, you know, you get used to it. Like the honeymoon phase is over, and you start digging in and kind of trying to massage this song into what it's going to be. And you kind of hit some strides where you like add some new sounds, and it's like, whoa, that's it. That's our target. And then you get used, that honeymoon phase gets over, and that goes the whole process. It happens multiple times. I would say those moments are big for me for a client. So like when I come out of a session, or I just get done with a couple takes and I go into the control room, and the client's just like, oh my gosh, this song is so great. Like that was absolutely perfect. You know, they're just so ecstatic, you know. That's such a huge payoff, because it's not just that I did an okay job. It's that I accomplished all the things I needed to accomplish, which was taking what they wanted, what they said they wanted, trying to translate it to the guitar through the microphones and all of that, and then coming back in and they're happy with it. Like it can be a daunting task sometimes, and so that just makes it gives you a lot of wind in yourselves for those times that doesn't happen.
Right, because you have a kind of hard job, which is that you basically have to like kind of read their mind.
Yeah,
because people aren't very good at telling you what they want in a way that is accurate to what they actually want. You know, I want it to be like big but small, and like meaningful but esoteric, you know, and like and music's especially like that, right? You know, like what do? You describe your influences. I mean, what do you do? But you want it to sound like you, and like all these things. So, you know, you're there to make the artist sound like themselves. You know, and like bring this song, which is a new song. It's never been a song before, unless it's a cover or whatever, you know, but like it's a new thing that you're birthing into life to help the artist basically fulfill their, you know, vision. Help, you know, and like
that's exactly it.
And I could just imagine, you know, like being the person to be standing right there when they're like, "Oh my gosh, guys, this is it. We're right there." And you're like yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. That's so cool.
That's a really great feeling for sure. Oh, I was just gonna say, and also just getting a call back from, like, if it's a new producer, you know, you've never worked for, getting that call back is like, all right, they like me, we're gonna work together again. That's a big one.
Do you have something you might consider the Blake Wrinn signature move, something that, or like a veteran move, something that is like your go-to when you're in the studio?
Well, I guess I would, and it's one of the reasons I think that Jerry Mack and I have just hit it off so good. Probably is just because he can do it all, right? I mean, he's a great player, even terrific right hand, unbelievable rhythm player, but also he's like the gag guy too. Like he does all the fun sounds, all the cool stuff, you know, and he's always kind of the guy that all the other players are like, after a take, they're like, how are you making that sound? You know, like, how the heck are you doing that thing over there? And I think I've leaned into that heavily, especially over the past decade. And I would say that's become my cup of tea too. I get a lot of calls just for that. Like, hey dude, the song's finished. We just don't know what it needs. Like, put the icing on the cake. Like, I'll get a lot of that.
Like funny, weird little sounds.
Oh yeah, stuff all over the place, dude. Like,
that's what they need. We need the Blake Wrinn funny, weird little sounds.
Oh yeah, especially on pop songs, because they're not super wall of sound AC/DC guitar. You know, they're bobbing and weaving synths, and they want kind of that thing a lot. So, I mean, I would say it's hard for me to talk about myself. I guess that's kind of my thing.
You know, you said his name was Jerry, right?
Yeah, Jerry
He
McPherson.
said he does it all. What about you? Like, what do you play besides guitar? Do you play other instruments too, or?
Yeah, I do. I love drums. Drums were kind of a first love for me.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I'm a big believer in drummers. I'm a drum snob when I'm a producer. I think they carry a lot of weight. I also think it's the one instrument you can learn and it kind of translates best to everything.
Really, you think
Um,
drums is the one that translates?
I think so
Hmm.
because I think piano is only second, and piano is a percussion instrument, so the only better percussion instrument's drums. But
Okay.
yeah, because rhythm is such a big part, and also with what I do, like rhythm is why we get hired back.
Hmm.
We don't get hired back because this nasty tapping solo we did.
Right.
We get hired back because of our rhythm, our creative rhythm parts, and other stuff, obviously, like the gags and stuff I mentioned.
Hmm.
But sorry, I feel like I'm digressing from the
No,
question now.
this is great. This is what I want to know. I mean, there's a lot of dudes that can shred, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and I'm so envious. Like I wish I could just be
Right.
fast. You
But
know.
you know, holding down, you know, like just like a great rhythm, it's hard.
And there's so many rhythms, right? Like
Yeah.
a rhythm defines the type of song it
Right.
is, and yeah, so
Yeah.
dialing into that can be a challenge.
Do you play keys at all? Do you do that stuff or no?
I do just basically like, I mean, when I was in drumline, we had to learn mallets and we had to do our
Mm.
scales every day, you know, all 12. And so that I got my songs like everybody. I can sit down on a piano and play my one or two songs really well.
Mm.
I can do all my scales, but that's, I mean, I can find a part. I have one here in the studio when I'm producing, like, you know, I'll pick out a part, but I normally am not that kind of
Mm.
person. Yeah, piano doesn't really come easy to
Yeah.
me.
And you know, long guitar. Do you play bass at all?
I
I
do.
mean,
My brother's a fantastic bass player, and he's a road player.
yeah, you
I've
call him in
been,
if you really need bass.
I mean, yeah, he's just so good, and I mean, I can play bass, and especially growing up with my father, I mean, he was a rhythm snob, and so he kind of put the roots of bass into us. So
Yeah.
I can make myself squeak by. My brother's a
Yeah.
killer player.
That's the thing for me. It's like I know bass is just, you know, it's like I know enough about bass to know it's a different instrument, and like when I play bass, I'm not a bass player. I'm just a guitar player that's holding a bass and playing. You know, like I know enough to know that like I'm not a bass player. Like I can fill in on
Yeah,
bass and it'll be fine, you know. But I'm not a bass player, and you'll be happier if you actually get a real bass player. You
man,
know?
it's a real deal. Yeah, that's a specialist instrument for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
They can take away and give energy to a song so fast. It's not
Oh
even
man,
funny.
yeah, great bass players are awesome. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, do you have something you might consider like a guilty pleasure? You know, like in the studio where you're, you know, like other people might be like, Blake, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, what is going on over there? And you're just like it's gonna be awesome. Just trust me.
Yeah, yeah. I have yeah, I have I guess I don't know if I would call it a guilty pleasure, but I definitely have those things where I'm like I have a method to the madness and I'm like, just bear with me, I promise guys it's gonna sound good. Like, you know, okay, give me another track, you know, okay, put that one over to the left, you know. No, I promise guys, give me another one. And what that is, I like to take parts that are like that maybe I don't know. Let me just think of something like if the guitar goes bum 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 bum. I may take that and go like bum 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 both on them, or like you know like work apart, like basically take an idea but split it apart, and then like one of them like maybe double it over here, only playing certain notes with a lot of reverb. So these things like zing out on different sides. And I like to do that. I like to take one part and think, how can I creatively make this like four parts that just explode? You know? I think that's one thing I like to do a lot.
Nice. For the audio listener, I'm going to try to do that right and left in post. We'll see if that works or not. Because
Ooh,
he did a visual thing, and I don't know if it's going to translate for the audio listeners, but we'll see if I can do that in post.
nice, nice, nice.
Okay. Do you have something that might be you look back over your career? How long have you been a studio musician? How long has it been?
I've been a studio musician for about 11 years
Okay.
now.
So looking back over those 11 years, do you have um, a certain, like, I don't know, like moment or song or a time you look back that you look back as maybe a defining moment or a favorite moment or a favorite song? You look back and you're just like,
Mm,
man, that was so good. That was just awesome.
man, yeah, I definitely, I'm definitely always kind of this look forward guy, like what's next, and kind of forget about what is behind me. And I have found while that is a good thing, it's also a bad thing. I've just found that my joy meter can go down if I
Hmm.
don't just, in general in life, if I don't just pause and reflect and look at all God's given me and just be thankful for it. Like
Hmm.
that gives me so much joy just to think about all the cool things He's provided for me and stuff. And I started a couple years back. I started just every time a song would release, putting it on Spotify.
Hmm.
And so I now have like a my resume playlist, on Spotify. And every now and then I'll just kind of be like, I'll go back and listen. I'll be like, yeah, I remember that record. I'm going to go back and listen to it. And sometimes I'm just like, I do not remember playing that. I've got to do that again. That was such a good part. Like I'll hear those things. Where in the moment I was just grinding through and so
Sure.
focused that,
You're
and
working, you know.
yeah. Or it's like, how in the world did I make that sound? Like, I got to figure out how to make that sound again. So
Yeah.
there's definitely some of those.
Do you remember maybe like the first time that you were driving around and you maybe heard a song you worked on the radio or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Like, that's me, or I was there.
yeah, that's a cool, especially like, the first time.
Yeah, that's
That's a
cool.
really special thing. Yeah, you kind of want to find out the play schedule and sit by the car, or like go for a drive in the car,
Yeah,
and
that's fun.
wait on it. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Okay, do you have advice for beginners? So if someone was sitting there and they're a musician of some sort, and whatever it is, a real instrument like guitar or drums, or a fake instrument like singers or bass players. Um, just kidding. I love
The
the bass players,
non-musicians,
right?
yeah, the
Um,
non-musicians.
if they're saying, hey, I would love to get in the studio or become a session musician, or learn how to become a sound engineer, or whatever it is, do you have any advice for that person to with the first steps that they could make?
Yeah. Um, the first steps are definitely going to be, make sure your fundamentals are in line. Again, back to tuning, timing, um, tone. There's a bunch of T's. Just kind of taking all those things into consideration. They're
Hmm.
so important, and those are the things that if they're not in check, you're not going to get a call back. Like those are the things that are going to be like, you just can't call that guy because either you're causing a lot of extra work for them on the back end, or it's unusable. They have to now pay to have somebody else come in.
Hmm.
So getting those things knocked out and being very, very hard on yourself about them. At least that's the way I operate. Um, that those are big. Those are make or break, fire you or hire you things.
Yeah.
And outside of that, get out and just like love people. I mean, like genuinely love, care for everybody you work with. Try to go above and beyond. Try to be the one, as you can't come in, especially when you get crazy busy. You just can't over prepare for everything. But this thing Jerry gave me when he was doing fill in on the Tim McGraw and Faith Hill tour. And he's like, I got to call last minute because the other guy was sick. I had to go in and play all these old parts, some of which he played on all the records, all those records, really. And but he was relearning these parts, and he said my goal was to go into rehearsal bored. And he said I was. He said I went into rehearsal. They were out on tour still, and they were still kind of working on some parts and trying some things. And he said, I felt good because I'd done my homework so much. I was kind of bored for a minute, like I was just locked in. And so I think I've taken that to heart, like trying to go in with the mindset of being bored. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
be knowing, not having all this anticipation of, do I know the part? Do I
Right. Know the parts cold to the point where you're not like stressing about the parts and all that stuff, and having your gear locked in to the point where you're not stressing about if your gear is going to work. And
Exactly.
yeah, you can.
Which knowing the song doesn't always happen in the studio, right? Like
Right.
sometimes you're walking in and just hearing the song, but
Right.
like you just said, having all that stuff in check, being as prepared as possible, will go a long way.
Yeah, so you can just sit there and just worry about whatever's coming.
Yeah,
That's
I think
awesome.
if your goal at the end of the day is to outlove everybody else, like care for people more than other people care for them,
Mm-hmm.
be the one that cares for people the most, and then try to be the most prepared one. Like work harder than everybody, and that's hard when you have kids. I know I don't work harder than everybody because I have kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to cheat them out of that time. So
Right.
I'm not going to be the busiest guy in town. That's okay.
Yeah, and then like you don't. The other thing I would say is that you don't have to, if you want to be a person that is recording music, you don't have to wait to go to Nashville to start recording music, right?
Not
You
at
can do
all.
that on your phone right now. You can, what is it? GarageBand is free if you have an iPhone, or
Yes.
if you have an iPad, you can start recording music right now. So just start making music and figure it out. At least just start. It's cool, man.
Yeah, and I need to do a plug real quick. So for on that note, Jerry's son Miles McPherson,
Mm-hmm.
ACM Drummer of the Year, has a great. I guess it's kind of a podcast, but it's just called Studio Musician Academy, and
Okay.
it's him and other studio players, A-list players, and they're talking about just all of these things that I'm talking about, like timing, tuning. So I would say check out something like that. I mean, that's the beauty of it, right? Like used to, like I said earlier, the school didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have YouTube. We have all these great resources. This podcast, all
Mm-hmm.
these things where we can listen and learn something. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is something people need to lean into as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that was a perfect answer for that segment. So, we have a segment on this show called "Let's Get Into It," where we talk to the guests, and if there's a way we can do it, we don't get to do it every episode because it, just the logistics of whatever the topic is. Where we try to do a little bit of the topic with the guests. And I was wondering if you had thought of any way we could do a little bit of this topic together. Did you think of anything?
I've got something, but
Okay,
I think
good.
it's a little more of a homework thing. So
Okay.
it's not necessarily something we can do well here in this scenario. But
Okay.
it's definitely, the good thing about it is outside of this podcast, it's something we encounter every day anywhere.
Okay.
Almost. Okay, so here's the thing. I just love audio in and out. I love the physics of it. Okay. The fun thing is, so as I mentioned to you, I'm also in the middle of building a commercial studio.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that more in just a minute.
We can do.
Yeah, and I don't want you to feel like I'm cutting you off. I'm going to give you lots of room. We're going to talk all about that, but yeah. Don't feel like you have to go into the whole thing right now because I'm going to talk about that a lot. But go ahead.
Awesome. Well. So just real quick with the new studio, we're doing what others have in the room, which is called Dolby Atmos.
Okay.
Okay. So here's where it gets fun. This is the kind of the challenger homework game for you to play out in public. So in Dolby Atmos, when we're mixing, normally we're talking about stereo. We hear that all the time, right?
Right. Stereo is two speakers, one right, one left.
Exactly. Mono is just one.
Right. And so if just for the listener at home, if you have earbuds in, that's stereo. Well, if they're stereo, sometimes it's just a mono signal. But if you have one ear in each ear, that's stereo. Okay.
Yes. All right. So here's where it gets fun. Dolby Atmos is like advanced surround sound. So we have speakers all around us when we're mixing it. I can put a guitar behind me and all this stuff, right? The cool thing is, though, to the listener, it's still at the end of the day comes down to just two ears. That's all we have, right?
Right.
Okay. So here's where it gets fun. The cool thing about Atmos mixing is like I said, I can put a guitar over here, but not just move him along this plane. but I can adjust how far away he sounds. He could sound 100 miles away, or he could sound like he's right here. Well, how does that happen? Well, if you think about it, we hear that way on a day-to-day basis. It's how we function in general. Like, if I was sitting here talking and my wife walked in here, I would turn and I would look at her, right? Because my brain told me she's coming from there. How did I know that? Well, I knew she wasn't right here. I knew she was over there, and I heard the door open, and I knew how far away the door felt.
Okay,
this is where we don't think about these things on a day-to-day basis. So the homework is start thinking about that, like how intense our hearing is. It's an unreal design. So go into a restaurant where everybody's talking, and try your best to zoom in on far conversations. And try your best to zoom in on like what's happening right by you. And why does it sound like it is where it is? Why don't they sound like they're right here? It's all because of reverb and time delays. So all of these things that I love this because this, video is a thing that the public is pretty familiar with now. You can't go into Best Buy without buying a 4K TV. It's the standard, right?
Right. I bought 3 of them last week. It's fine.
There you go. And so the general public is starting to get very aware of quality, especially seeing and hearing media. But they know good audio now, but they know why on video, but they don't know why with audio.
Right.
Things sound so interesting and far away. So that's a fun game to play. It's like, why? That's really interesting. This place has its own reverb, and it makes it somebody feel far away or close or. Right.
And they'll buy that 4K TV and then still use the sound from the sound bar of the TV, and they won't put in the 5.1 surround and then wonder why the sound is still horrible,
Exactly.
Yeah. And as a musician with all my pedals, reverb is one of those that's kind of hard to explain. Like echo, like delay is easy, it's like hello, 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 hello. That's easy to say, right? It's like reverb. Like hello, it's kind of hard to explain,
it is.
So, but there's reverb literally everywhere. See, reverb is just sound reflections, which happen literally everywhere. If you're inside, outside, it's just sound bouncing off walls, and it does that in every single place that you are ever at, and it affects the sound.
Oh, I was going to say a good way to test that is just put your fingers in your ears. We've all done it. But how uncomfortable it feels. It's just dead and like it feels gross,
Or put on headphones like this and then have your wife walk in the room and start talking to to
That's right.
It's a great way to ignore your wife and also make her mad at you. It's perfect.
Yes,
not
it's
recommended.
Good for a lot of things.
Great. So Blake, this has been awesome. We're going to wrap up here in just a minute, but I wanted to talk to you. This is the question I ask every guest, which is the point of the show, which is what is N+1? For guitar players, this is the name of the show came from Guitarist, right? Which is how many guitars is the correct number of guitars, which is N+1, which is N is the current number of guitars. We always need one more, right?
I love it.
In the context of the show, we want to talk about what is N+1 in your journey with your passion. So in your studio recording journey, what is N+1? What is the next thing on the horizon? What are you passionate about? What's coming? You mentioned earlier, I always want to look forward. I don't want to look back. It's hard for me. So what are you looking forward to? You mentioned your new studio. Let's talk about it. Is there, and if there's other ththings too, you can talk about that, but let's talk about it.
No, for sure. I think it's two things just hitting on the first brief or very quickly. I definitely want to, just keep playing guitar and doing it paying my bills, doing what I'm doing. Like I love doing it. I love being a session player. And I think just constantly staying on top of current music, trying to stay in on that is something I always plan on doing. I don't even know if my wife and I are talking about retiring. I don't even know what retiring looks like. Like Jerry always says, people retire and learn to play the guitar. I'm already doing that. I guess I'll just keep doing it. But seriously, I think I'll just be my end goal for guitar playing. I think is just being able to pick a little more what I do and what I don't. That's probably it.
Yeah, a little bit more selective.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what it looks like. And then, so with the new studio, so basically, so it's funny because I've worked out of Nashville actively as a session player for 11 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and worked out of Nashville for, um, you know, 15 to maybe close to 20 years. Gosh. Um, and with that, it's funny because I haven't lived in the Nashville area in about 13 years. So I've been doing sessions within that time and commuting. So I live in Knoxville, Tennessee,
Mm-hmm.
which is beautiful. I'm in Dolly's country,
Nice.
and that's where my home overdub studio is. And so all that to say, we're a film town here in Knoxville. We have the Discovery umbrellas. We have HBO. We have Warner Brothers, and then a bunch of terrific independent film studios. And so with that, there's also UT School of Music pumps out just unbelievable musicians. And I started realizing that, most of these musicians are going on to touring acts and doing very well for themselves. And I just started noticing everybody's having to move. People that wanted to record a record were having to outsource elsewhere. And that even came into the film industry portion. People were having to do that all elsewhere. And so when I stumbled into producing myself, I was having either my assistant were having to schedule, herd all the cats for the session, the players, everybody involved, but now have to schedule like time to go to a studio worth doing it at, which was mostly in Nashville. So that became just a giant headache. And we realized through a couple years of that Knoxville had a huge deficit as far as that goes. So again, through some direction of the Lord, we jumped in and we're building a commercial studio here in Knoxville. We didn't want to do just another home studio. We have that here. We wanted somewhere that even the people with the home studios could come and get a benefit out of.
Yeah.
We could do, really high quality, like Abbey Road level orchestral recording.
Wow.
We'll be doing Dolby Atmos mixing. So we'll kind of fill this gap that really where nothing exists between New York, Atlanta, and Nashville. There's just nothing.
Wow.
So that's our goal, and we actually just started breaking ground about a month ago. So we're right.
Oh man, that's amazing.
Right into that, yeah.
Do you have a timeline of when you think the studio might be done?
We're getting closer to nailing down a timeline.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things involved. Another thing too is most studios are retrofitted. Even the ones on Music Row, there were other buildings and they retrofit them the best they can.
You're going to have a brand new building that's going to be built to your own specs. It's going to be super quiet. It's going to be amazing.
They are, yeah. And because of that ground up build, there are a lot of extra things that add on to that time. Like right now, for instance, we're in the phase of pouring concrete.
Right.
And normally, as soon as you could walk on the concrete, it's not even dry or cured, it's just you can walk on it. They start framing for a building. Well, not in our case. We've got to even go out and babysit it, keep it wet for 30 days, like not let it get dry.
And is that because of the like acoustic treatments that you're doing to it?
Yeah.
Or? Oh,
well,
really?
So that'll be the floor of it, right? And the thing about concrete is it will transmit resonation like nobody's business. So that would get from room to room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to cure it properly so that it's never an issue. And the studio will be an A and B room studio. So like we want people to be able to mix a EDM record with crazy bass shaking the place in B, while in A, it's a super quiet room with string instruments. Those preamps are super hot. Mm-hmm. Every little squeak of a chair will get amplified. Like we want to be able to do those at the same time and not have any bleed. So
that's awesome. I love the vision that you have, and I love that you're doing it right. And I just shudder to think how much it must cost. So we're gonna let you worry.
That's not a fun part. Yeah,
we're gonna let you worry about that, and we're just excited that you're doing it. That's amazing.
Thank you.
That is so cool. And you mentioned, I think when we talked on the phone, that you had some ties to some ministry stuff going on with that as well.
Yeah, we do. Well, so part of my journey too, I had mentioned earlier in the conversation that I felt like the Lord had called me to be a session musician,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds like a way to cop out on a dream a little bit sometimes when I say it, but it really wasn't. The Lord genuinely, even the days I didn't want to do it, I felt like He was telling me to go after it. And alongside that, shortly after I got that word from the Lord, I felt like He wanted me to be a pastor, and I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want to be the guy I saw growing up, even though I loved him. I knew I wasn't the three-piece suit guy. I mean, look at me. I'm like a skateboarder or BMXer, I'm just not that. And so it took me a while to put that together, but all that to say, the Lord gave me these big dots: session musician, pastor, Knoxville. Like what? Like who moves out of Nashville to continue their career in music? So the Lord asked me to do some pretty wacky things. Again, producing was never anything that was on my radar. I didn't aspire to be a producer, but it just happened into it. Some friends asked me to. I loved them. I wanted to do it. Felt like I could. Fell in love with producing, and through all of that, I realized that if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have realized the deficit Knoxville had for a studio.
Yeah.
So through all that, the Lord has finally started to connect some dots of just what pastor looks like in that scenario. Like I don't have any desire to be the guy on the soapbox yelling at everybody about going to hell. I'm not. I'm actually quite an introverted guy, and so that all didn't make sense to me. Pastor, very introverted guy, until I just started finding even pastoral mentors and people who take me under their wing and say, "Hey, look, it's because you're not a vocational pastor. The Lord's called you to be a marketplace pastor." So all that to say, I think that's our intent with Clive Studios. That's the name of our recording studio. And that's just to love people properly. Just love people properly.
Right.
And through that pastor, be the guy that if their marriage is in the dumps at 11 p.m., and they need somebody to call, or they feel like killing themselves, or, crazy stuff that my wife's a pastor. She deals with all day. We're dealing with that just in the community,
right.
Music community. And I think that's ultimately why we're building this studio. It's not, it wasn't a big dream of mine. It was the Lord's big dream that He asked me to do. Some days I feel like I'm building the ark and I have no idea how to.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I wish you the best. I'll be praying for you and your ministry and your studio and you and your wife and your family and stuff. That's so cool.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We met, I meant to tell the story on the top, but we met, it was at one of the, we had Brian Lochi on. We talked about the Church Collective, and they have one of those one-day ministries in Modesto. And we met. It was like the last one before COVID. It was like 2 weeks before COVID.
Oh yeah. And they were actually closing the airport when we left.
Right. It would literally like days before COVID hit, and I attended your class on Nashville numbers, and I followed you on Facebook since then, and so that's kind of how we met. And I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you, and you made a good impression. You don't remember me. Don't tell me you remember me.
No, I did. Don't. You know what was funny is I didn't remember when you first reached out. Yeah. But then as soon as I looked at your face, I was like, oh yeah, okay. Absolutely. All right. So I do. I promise.
No, it's okay. You don't have to. That's all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been awesome. This has been awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully we can stay in touch. Maybe we'll have you on again in the future to talk about something else or whatever. But this has been great. What I want to know is, how can people follow you? And I want one extra thing. So I always say, how can people follow you? Like Instagram, Facebook, however, whatever. But I want one extra thing. I want you to tell us one thing you've worked on that you're really proud of, so we can go listen to some of your music too. So,
okay.
You have to. I know you're humble, but give us one humble brag on top of all your plugs.
Okay,
we want to listen to some of your music.
I can do it. I'm gonna pull up that resume playlist I was telling you about because I'm so bad at remembering off the top of my head. Well, you know what? I would be happy to give you the link to this playlist.
We could do that. Yeah, give me the link, and if you
Yeah.
want, you can message it to me in Instagram, an Instagram Messenger, and I will put the link in our Facebook group. Which in every episode we have the link to our Facebook group in the show notes. So make sure you add yourself as a to the member on our Facebook group, and we will have the link to the Spotify playlist on Facebook. How about that, everybody? That's a reason to join. You can listen to Blake's music, which is great. So, but how can people follow you or find you?
Yeah, so I'm a pretty humble social media guy. Instagram's really about all I do. It's just at Wrinn, BWRINN.
Mm-hmm.
And then my website, which needs severe updating, by the way, is BlakeWrinnmusic.com.
Yeah.
And I am on Facebook, but I apologize in advance because you probably won't do that.
Yeah, he doesn't post often, but it's usually good. It's like, hey, I'm working on this, or here's a cool thing. I remember one thing you posted one time, which was when the Strymon, what's the delay that was like their tape delay?
The Volante
came out, and you're like, here's how I'm using it with the studio, and I have it on the deck rather than on the floor, and I'm using it to patch in and out. I just thought that was so cool.
Oh, thanks, man.
Oh, man, I just
thank goodness they designed it to do that.
Oh man, I was just like the way you were using it, it just blew my mind. Like I feel like they made this for me as a studio guy. Like, I don't even use the pedal. I use it to patch in and out and over here. I'm like, oh, that's so cool.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah.
That's such a fun pedal, too, man.
Anyway. Okay, so we're going to ask you the 2 silly questions to get you out of here. Thank you so much for coming on.
My favorite, yeah.
And I think you might have some good ones. So the first question is, I want you to say a sentence or two and casually drop the name of the most famous person you've ever met.
Oh, okay. So I actually don't get starstruck from music people. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
But actors.
Okay.
There was one time I was at Brad Paisley's mock show. So I was watching. We were underground in Bridgestone Arena, and I was watching Brad run his mock show, and I hear this voice behind me, and she says, "Excuse me, sir, do you know where the water is?" And I turn around, and it's Kimberly Williams, his wife. And like I grew up on Father of the Bride, so I'm just looking at her like I'm like the scarecrow. I'm like, like, do you know who you are? I don't even think I said anything. I think I just pointed. But man, that for some reason that one got me. I couldn't say a word, and I had to go home and tell my mom and like tell my wife, and I was like, oh my gosh. I literally think I went.
Yeah, speaking of good musicians, man, we saw Brad Paisley, I think last summer.
He's a monster.
Oh my goodness, he can really play.
Wow,
oh goodness.
Wow. I don't think he played the same thing that entire 3 hours I was there.
Boy, he's good. Yeah. I don't even like country music, and
he's got it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, he's good. Okay, last question. This is my favorite question. I would do the whole show just for this question.
Okay, all right.
All right. In your opinion, what is the greatest all-time cartoon theme song?
Oh, it's a hard one.
No wrong answers. Except for that there is wrong answers.
So many good ones.
I know.
Okay. Like quality, timeless, The Jetsons.
The Jetsons? That's a new one. We haven't had a Jetsons before.
A favorite is Wrinn and Stimpy.
Wrinn and Stimpy's good. Yeah. That's a couple we haven't had before.
Good ones,
I know.
Man. Hey Arnold was always a favorite.
Hey Arnold. Okay.
That smooth jazz thing. Oh, so sick.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, Blake, thank you so much. I know it's late where you're at. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. Hey, guys, Blake has been amazing. If you are watching this, thank you so much. If you stayed this long, make sure that you give us a like. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Go check out Blake. You can follow us on the Facebook group and listen to some of his music. If you are another one thing you can do is you can share this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. Otherwise, until next time, everybody, don't be a jerk.